Welcome to the NewsBlitz. Good evening, ladies and gents, and welcome to the NewsBlitz for the week of the 1st of March. The NewsBlitz is a brief take on some of the gaming news of the past week, providing a quick look at the news, hence news, followed by a heady rush of hot, fresh opinions, the Blitz. This is a program that works hard to wear its biases on its sleeve and give you a clear line between fact and thought. This week, Gabe Newell calls someone an arse, new Pokemon titles are announced, and Microsoft unveil old franchise Conker for their VR platform. In eSports news, the DotA 2 major in Shanghai suffered a rocky production that struggled to keep games running and suffered long downtime periods between matches. Things only drew more attention when the decision was made to fire the host of the event, James Too Good Harding, midway through the second day. In an offer of explanation, Valve head Gabe Newell took to Reddit and made the following post, I quote, "James, we've had issues with James at previous events. Some people at Valve lobbied to bring him back for Shanghai, feeling that he deserved another chance. That was a mistake. James is an arse, and we won't be working with him again. As long as we're firing people, we are also firing the production company that we've been working with on the Shanghai Major. They will be replaced, and we hope to get this turned around before the main event." In response, Mr. Harding released a 17-page statement which you can find in the description. In it, he goes over his previous interactions with Valve and past productions in Dota 2, trying to explain the situation in detail. As it's too much to fully cover in this short segment, I'll summarise by saying that Mr. Harding offers up evidence for all his mannerisms, including his request for a private suite and his own payment of it, combined with his own hosting style. But let's get in depth in the Blitz. So first and foremost, Too Good is an old esports personality. He is very much a known quantity. If you are familiar with esports, you are probably familiar in some ways with Too Good. He's been around for ages, he's hosted tons of events, he's commentated plenty of events. My personal first experience with him was in StarCraft 2, but the guy goes back to Quake days basically. And the thing with Too Good is he's always been a little bit divisive. He's always had a very laid-back style, he's always been very relaxed, and he's very willing to court controversy. He's very willing to make bold statements, make crude jokes, that kind of thing. That being said, you can't deny his ability to host and to keep it entertaining, keep it light, and keep everything flowing nice and smoothly. He's very experienced at that. It does often come at a cost where he has some crude humour or some, I don't know, mildly offensive humour, I guess you could say. And it can also lead to things like having in-jokes on stage, which one of the more controversial things that happened is he called someone a bottom bitch, which apparently he knew the guy he was calling a bottom bitch, but hey, we don't know that he knew that guy, and it just sounds very unprofessional, it sounds very harsh, and it sounds like it shouldn't be on a stage, basically. In his statement, he tried to explain where the idea that he's an arse could come from, because he knows that his stage persona is very arsey. It's very confrontational in some ways, it's very, I don't know, open to putting his own foot in his mouth. But one way he also explains it is he also sees himself as someone who raises production issues. Basically, if hosts and people on panels he's hosting have complaints or have issues, he's often the one to go and raise them with production, just because he's more experienced, he's been to a lot of events, and as such he's more used to dealing with people and dealing with production. He knows the people a little bit more. Apparently in this event, in the Shanghai Major, they had massive issues with production. I'm hearing like hour and a half, 2-hour delays before games get running, that kind of thing. A lot of this was apparently due to broadcasting rules in China, and the fact that broadcasting in China is not like broadcasting in the West, it's slightly different. For example, the broadcast is delayed as it goes out over satellite, and it gets monitored as well for what they've been saying, just due to regulations in that country. So all of this caused a lot of friction, of course, and there's been a lot of issues with the event. It's clear that Valve are not happy with how it went, and Gabe came out and made this statement. Now, Gabe's statement is unprofessional. Like, there's no getting around that. You don't call someone an arse in public, especially if you're a CEO. But what's really interesting to me is the fact that it brought all of this discussion into the forefront. It brought everything out into the open. Everyone sort of aired their laundry. At least James has very publicly made this statement and explained himself in as much detail as he can. People are discussing this stuff all over the place. Valve have since remained fairly quiet about the statement and about their plans going forward, and we don't know too much about them. We don't know what's going on with Valve behind closed doors. From what we can tell, they haven't really been talking with James at all. I know he's reached out to Valve, he said that he's reached out to Valve, and they haven't given him any statements going forward. Now, I'm fine with esports being a little looser, a little freer, a little more open in its dialogue. You know, trying to make esports into something it's not, I think, is a big trap. Trying to make it like normal sports and trying to make it about suits and things being very structured and formal. It's the wrong path to take, in my opinion. I like esports being loose, being freer, being more open to discussion. It's born from the internet, it's born from discussion forums. People need to be willing to discuss things. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we have everything out in the open, and something like this really does feel like it should have been a little bit more behind closed doors before, they start discussing this in public about, oh, did they give James enough rope to hang himself, as the phrase goes? And it makes you wonder how discussions like this should go forward. Now, what is interesting, what's happening now, is something that's been pushed for a little while, and there's unions forming now, or at least people are trying to get a union together. And I know top tier eSports host Red Eye has come forward and said that he'd be interested in trying to make something, he'd be interested in trying to build something, some kind of talent union for hosts and presenters in esports, for them to have some kind of representation, to deal with large organizations, to help getting payments. I know players have been looking to unionize in a lot of esports as well, looking to get representation, looking to get fair treatment from large organizations, make sure prize money's on time, that kind of thing. And that needs to happen, in my opinion. You need players at least coming together, being willing to talk back to these big organizations, being willing to be dealt with fairly, and being willing to call them out when things don't go to plan. Now, just to briefly touch back on James, in some ways it does feel like they gave him enough rope to hang himself. They basically said, be yourself, and then gave him 2 hours to fill, and lo and behold, he says controversial things. That's not too big a surprise. What I see is a failure to, tell him to properly rein it in, tell him to dial it down in some ways, tell him to basically, calm it down a bit. People are watching, people are looking for professionalism here, we need you to be professional. And I think if you told him that, I think he could be very professional. I think he can manage that perfectly well. I think he can clean up his act, and I think he could, play it straight and narrow and play it properly. What he was told instead was to be himself, and so he was himself, and he had to fill 2 hours, and lo and behold, this happens. Now, frankly, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with these unions, so best of luck to all of them, and I think that's where we'll round this off. I'm interested to see where this goes, and interested to see if these unions do arise. Next up, Nintendo have unveiled the new Pokemon titles of Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon after the titles were spotted in a trademark listing. The hilariously named games of Pokemon S and M are being slated for release worldwide in 2016, with, well, very little information, so let's quickly blitz it. So first and foremost, Pokemon's just a really big goddamn deal. It's a franchise that's probably older than most viewers of this channel, or about the same age, I guess. I know my demographic's a little bit older than average, so probably about the same age, maybe just a little bit younger. And I always wonder with Pokemon whether they'll ever change, mix it up, make it more interesting. Probably not. And this is only really here because the name is hilarious. I mean, Pokemon S&M, who thought that through? No one, clearly. I will also just add some interesting meat to this, which is the increasing problem of developers leaking things through trademark applications. It's always funny to me when that happens. That said, the amount of false flags I've seen arise out of it as well is pretty hilarious, so I don't know. I never really try and put too much stock in rumours. I'm patient enough to wait for the real thing, so I guess we're getting Pokemon S&M sometime in 2016. And finally, Microsoft unveiled a new title for the HoloLens VR hardware, Young Conker. In this title, the game creates levels from your surrounding environment before letting the virtual character use it as a platformer. The reaction to this has been incredibly controversial, however, and to explain it, we'll have to quickly get to the Blitz. So I have no idea how many people out there will know about Conker's Bad Fur Day. It's a game that was released for the N64, and it was an interesting title at the time, to say the least. Games for a mature audience was never really common in those days. And Conker makes it even more weird and more obscure because it looks like a kiddie game. It was basically designed almost as like a fooling game, like a trick, where the game looks very much like, I don't know, Mario, for example, but it has very adult themes in it, it has very crude jokes and crude humour, and as such it was something wholly unique and it very much lodged into a lot of older gamers' psyche. It's an icon, basically, for a more innocent time with a very vulgar title. And recently, Conker has been reappearing. He reappeared as like the mascot of a rare collection box, for example, and then he's reappeared now. And frankly, these appearances have been poorly received, to say the least. And this one is not really a surprise. I mean, look at it. Look at it. It just looks awful. It looks like it has some horrible birth defect. It just, no. What? what is this, Microsoft? Did you really think this was going to work? Who thought this through? Who approved this? Who looked at your back catalogue and said, yeah, let's get this popular character and make it look really silly and have nothing to do with what made it popular in the first place? And the backlash from this is totally justified, and I love seeing it. I love seeing people call big companies out on their shit, and in this instance, yeah, do it. Now, we'll probably get into the oncoming storm of VR products in another episode when we get a little bit more than price points, but this was worth mentioning just because I've seen it pop up in a number of different places, and it always tickles me when it does, because it's just awful, Microsoft. Like, what are you doing? Thanks for joining me in this round of NewsBlitz. I've been Josh, as one voice amongst many, and I'll see you next week for another look into the world of gaming news. Esports controversy is always such an easy source of it. As always, your thoughts and feedback are appreciated. And if you like the video, hit that little thumb, it does help immensely. Doodles.